There's what else? There's yeah, a lot of other words like that. Yeah, but it's odd. They get changed in some languages. Some anyway. All right. Aluminium. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about social contagion, guys. We're going to do this. Eat your chocolate. It's okay. You can't be any more than I am. All right, so let's see. So we're going to think about simple models where we have, and I'll talk about this stuff in general for a while, but as is my want, but so general kind of media influence, so everyone's being bathed in some media signal versus word of mouth. All right, and there's everything in between, but these are the two sort of big pieces we can talk about. And so this is, if it was diseases, this would be airborne or stuff that's mediated through the environment some way. Contact, which is the basic kind of idea of contagion, at least in the word. All right, so very, 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 very hard thing. And this matters for everything that you're interested in, right? If you're working on engineering stuff, it doesn't matter. If you want to make a nice little widget, someone has to use it at some point. And you need them to tell other people to use it, and so on. So it has to be made well, but it has to be something that spreads. So it's easy to kind of not think about this because you're making a beautiful widget, but it touches everything. Okay, so this is something that's incredibly, influence is very, very hard to measure. And of course, Facebook is now trying to do that all the time by doing sneakier and sneakier things with how they measure what you've been doing. Like they can apparently see where your mouse has been hovering and stuff, which is pretty bad. Anyway, but you buy something now or you start speaking in a certain way, maybe it's obvious, as to where they came from, but maybe it was a collection of influences that you're not really, you'd be hard pushed to kind of recount properly. So here's something we'll at least model for fun and profit, will be influence response function. So given some fraction of other people so you could say this a fraction of other people doing something or a number of other people you see, there'll be we'll think about this. Is the response function something like this? This is the probability you adopt a certain behavior? Or is it, does it curve like this? How does it work? Or is it sort of a switch? So these things are hard to measure in practice. And they're something you could quantify for diseases as well, for different kinds of diseases. But we'll see what happens when we at least model with some of these things. And I'll point you to some of the work that's been going the last 10 years to try and quantify that feature. We'll get to this. We love this story, right? This makes complete sense that there are some people that you could find, or people that create everything that happens, essentially, by being the super influentials. So I mentioned some of this the other day. So Gladwell, we'll come back to Gladwell later on. And so opinion leaders. All right, so this is an infectious idea, and it's or influentials or opinion leaders, that there are certain people who dictate essentially what everyone else does. There are books with titles like 10% tells the rest 90%, what to do, that kind of thing. Okay.
I was just wondering, in this question, are there some individuals that are super influencers? Is that related to some kind of measurement of popularity, or is influence and popularity something separate?
Okay, so they are different things. You might imagine they're connected, and an easy thing to start with would be to find the person who has the most friends. Let's say you want to spread something through a high school. Let's say it's educational values, right? You might go and find the popular kids, but it might be that you have to do something much more complicated. You have to see the ones that people really listen to, and they might not be the ones with the most friends, or it might be that their network that's adjacent to them. That's the important thing. But that's harder to tell. The easy story is to find the person with the most friends.
Yeah. Okay.
So we see that doesn't always work. So there are certainly some models, which is odd. I mean, it's just I think surprising to people, where the most influential characters are very simple models. The most influential characters are the ones with sort of maybe a medium number of friends, explicitly, right? Like if you go and target the most connected people, they will not do as well as the people with a medium number. So we'll see how that turns out. It's a big story, it's a network story. But that's a very good question. Well, he's a super influential, right? This all makes sense to you. All right, so here's a thing though. I made so this is Stephen Colbert coming to you from your TV, or your magic rectangle of some sort. Yeah, I made this in XFig a long time ago. Anyway, here's the original idea. So this is the original way of framing this, right? So it's the hypodermic model, just inject, right? So here's the media and just boom, straight into people. They're just sitting at home. And this is when people start to think about, well, what's happening once now we have radios. Everyone has a radio, and they're listening to the radio. That's a huge change, right? The telegraph is a gigantic change in the way people communicated and gathered news and so on. And essentially this, I mean, people will try and say that social media and the way it is now is sort of basically always been, but it's very different now, of course, obviously. I mean, the real-time thing. But the fun things about the telegraph and so on, right, is that people, because it costs money, they shorten things. So you got the kind of abbreviations of all sorts and code and so on that you sort of see on Twitter as well. Something like that kind of medium. But anyway, so you think about the big transitions. Telegraph was a big one. Radio is huge. Now you're just bathing the world in some signals, right? So this becomes the idea of how people are receiving information. In the 50s, this idea appears, and it becomes incredibly, itself, ironically influential, right? So it's the two-step method. It's the idea or model. There is a media source radiating truths out to the people, and then there are these so-called influentials, or opinion leaders, as they were called at the time, opinion leaders by Katz and Lazarsfeld. So there's a book, 1955, that's cited here by those two. They went to us, I think their main area of study was a Midwest town. They interviewed people, you know, why did you buy this soap? Why did you buy this, you know, why did you go and see this movie? Why, whatever it was, you know, all sorts of things. Why did you buy this dress? Why did you, blah, 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 blah. So it's, you know, very thorough piece. And this is they're very clear that they say this is not what happens in the real world. But here's a way of moving away from at least this to something better. And that's that there are some people who are more, you know, that pay attention to the media and then repeat it and so on to their friends, and they have a stronger level of influence. Now, of course, this media is affecting everyone, and this is just getting the touch of a network, right? And you can put it all in your head. You can put all of this in your head. You can see how this happens. This is what it's much more like, but it's much harder to, you can't put this in your head. You can't do it, right? So there are people talking to each other all the time. There's media of all sorts going everywhere. Now it's, you know, more and more out of control. When we think of, you know, sitting there with TweetDeck and you're just like some sort of massive comm situation being, you know, the Matrix basically. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah. Like cricket scores. Okay, so yeah, people are talking to each other, and so that's this, and this, the desire to have this be true. And yes, of course, there are some people that you can pay them lots of money and they will go and talk to their friends, and that will help you. The desire to have that to be true, but the reality of this means that you've had work that's gone on for 50 to 60 years that keeps finding out that some people are influential now, but not tomorrow. They're influential in this realm, but not in this realm. Why is that? There's a lot of confusion, right? So, because we want the simplest story to work. So the great hunt for influentials has gone on, and the tipping point is, in some ways, the sort of the apogee of that kind of work, because now it's massively popularized conceptually, and you know it just remains that it's messier. It really is, and you know, of course, the way we try to spread things now is through all sorts of channels at the same time. Yes.
That's where we get that people who are trying to get the letter to some random car repairman in Indonesia. You know,
the small world search. Yeah, yeah.
You don't call up, you know.
You have some directedness.
NBC and say, hey, I'm trying to get to these guys because there's only one path.
Right.
You know, other paths.
People search in very different ways. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, you know, so you have a problem with, I don't know, a car or a computer or a, you know, a thing you're trying to plant in a garden. You're going to ask different people. And you're going to ask Google, and you're going to do all sorts of things, right? So it is more complicated. But anyway, the acknowledgement is that there's a network of interactions, and there isn't, you know, you could imagine an influence network. So here's a big social network, and about this topic, there's a subset of interactions that now have all sorts of different strengths that represent the influence network about that topic. So some people, I don't know, let's say it's Avengers characters, right? There are some interactions which are very close and so on, which just disappear as soon as you start saying, well, who influences whom about Avenger characters, right? These people never ever talk about comic books or something, right? So that just, so you get this smaller subset. If it's about politics, that's a whole different set of links lighting up and so on. Very hard to think about.
There was a YouTube video just came out a week or two ago about one of the guys from Marvel
Mm.
discussing his big data approach to keeping track of all the Marvel characters, timelines, and everything else, and how to make it accessible for not only the avid viewer, but the new viewer.
Oh yeah, okay, so they can get in there. Because yeah, it is a little, it's a pretty high bar.
And so it's a really
Yeah, I really have to read these 1,000 comics to. There's a lot of rebooting. There's a lot of rebooting. There's a lot of rebooting.
It's also sales. She's working on it. They don't like high numbers, so they reset them to one and what's going on.
Yeah, because one is pretty cool. So that's a collector's thing. Yeah. Well, didn't that just happen all across the board? Was it Marvel that did that all across the board?
They just did. I mean, there was a big X-Men reboot recently, and there's like Uncanny Avengers and Amazing X-Men.
I pointed to that paper, right? That was early on in the whole Small World love affair, which was about the right. Okay. Oh.
for about 30 comics.
Yeah, wow, that's weird. You could have some weird code or encrypt, like this number, you have to figure out which number, yeah. No, just glyphs, not even numbers. All right, okay. We do seem to be off topic. See, here we are. Obviously, that was a topic for which this set of links is quite active, right? But I don't know. I could probably pick something else. I don't know. All right, stop. But you know, so these you can imagine these going on or off or becoming stronger. You know, depending on if it's people are going to talk about football or baseball, right? Some of these will go up and down, whatever it is. All right. So hard. All right, so why do things spread? Is it because, and this is what we'd really like, is because there are special individuals who set everything off. I'll kind of have a summary of this later on. We have to go through a few other things, like why people become famous or things become famous. Or is it system-level properties or some mixture of both? Of course, this is not necessarily exclusive. And this is one way to frame it, right? So if there's a fire spreads through a forest, is it the match that lit it that's key? And that's pretty, put in that language, it's, of course, metaphors are dangerous things, but it's if it's raining, then the forest doesn't burn. It doesn't matter how big your match is, right? But if it burns down, then we tend to at least with social phenomena say, oh, here's the match, and let's make another one of those because that's the thing that started it all. Let's replicate that. Well, let's use this match again. Actually, like, why doesn't it work? It doesn't work on this forest, right? And I'm going to say it's because we're story-making machines. That's why tend to do this, right? So something happens and we go back and find the initiator and we tell a whole story about why everything took off. Okay, we'll come back to this. So Mona Lisa is a potent example, actually, and I'll mention it again, but David Sassoon, there's a book by Sassoon which traces the history of the Mona Lisa, which wasn't really famous until the end of the 1800s, beginning 1900s. So people started to think highly of Leonardo in particular. Again, I mean, it was sitting in the Louvre, but no one was painting it, no one was copying it. I mean, if it's the greatest painting in the world, then they'd be bowing down before it. There was a theft, there was an attempt to vandalize it. So these things kicked it. They got a kick from that. And, but his fame as an engineer, which you guys should appreciate, also helped move it up. But it spent close to 400 years not being the most famous painting in the world, which is a pretty grave mistake if it is, Nice thing, and I'll come back to this, I suppose, is that fame comes from the Latin fama, which means to talk. So it's about talk, which we implicitly sort of understand. But it's beautiful, it's very nice that we've encoded it so strongly in language. One of those letters has something on top of it. Anyway, but this is an amazing example, right? I mean, who's actually seen this thing? It's not that exciting, right? It's so exactly right. It's small. It's disappointingly small. For some reason, you think it's going to be giant.
And there's just like a crowd of people around.
And you can't see it because of the humans. Too many humans.
You're like, okay, so it's like
Yeah.
this big, and
Yeah.
there's like so many better paintings over in this alleyway.
Yeah, and I mean, it has a story, and so that's okay. But there are some paintings, and I will say some of the I mean, if paintings can do this, but some of the, which, it's absurd, but some of the Monets, the haystacks and so on, I mean, the sun just comes out of them. There's something quite otherworldly about them, which means that experientially you're like, even if you'd never heard of it before, you're like, oh my God, it's really shocking. Whereas Mona Lisa's like, okay. So it's much harder to understand these system properties, these group properties, much harder to describe them. It's much harder to also, then try to manipulate them and so on. So this is just a bad plan. We don't like it. We don't have narratives for groups, really. We tend to just reduce them to individuals. Like if you have a sports team, we like to say it's, Michael Jordan and the Bulls. It's just like a bunch of other characters with, it's much easier if we can, the president, did this, did that, said this, said that, thought of all these things, which is usually a result of hundreds and hundreds and thousands, many people, operating together. Right? But it's just a much easier thing to do.
What makes group properties hard to understand here, but statistics, it's all about groups. Just like one
Yeah, you're finding, but you are finding lots of averages. Yeah, the average person. So you are, I think, again doing that. Your standard deviation is usually a step too far for most people, right? Like we don't report that, like you see in the. You get medians. We can handle medians a little bit. I'm talking about very generally. Quartiles. People talk about those things. Spreads, variation. I know. Financial people know.
Yeah, where's the
We'll talk about some spread, but it's trying to here's a representative individual. You'll see this in stories about, say, a natural disaster. X woke up that morning, blah 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 blah, brushed their teeth, and then there was whatever it was, a bad thing happened. So you put yourself in that, and that happens. You look at this. I mean, it happens all the time in journalism because that is a very natural, reasonable hook. We're embodied stories, right? So we can travel along in that thing. But if you try to describe, I don't know. We tend to, right, 30,000 people going to work in New York City, or something, right? I mean, you can't do it. I mean, we can sort of, it's better visualizing, I suppose. We make some funny thing, but that's a little hard to create with words. Yeah. So these things, especially networks, the things flowing through networks and so on, it's just hard to put your head on it. So it's always good to look at what people said before and after, right? So this was the example of, preface what I said. So this is a book I do have it if you want to enjoy yourself. Right, so it's not the most famous painting to start with. You had vandalism, this sort of thing. I mean, this is parody. I mean, so the Mona Lisa is now the Mona Lisa. It's the Mona, you have X is the Mona Lisa of X's, right? I mean, we don't even think about the thing anymore. You have this one, you have parodies inside of parodies. Okay, but also the biggest story is it's kind of tiny. This is a big deal. It happened before you guys were born, I guess. Right, so there was this thing called the European Union, and Eastern European. There is now this European Union. And things collapsed, and really, and so this is well done here. So now out of never, the idea being it's never going to happen, but suddenly it happens now, and from, you can always point to someone who said something is going to happen, right? There's always one person who said the financial, right? For not good reasons. There are some people who will have figured it out, right? Fair enough, but they were not being listened to. And in it seems in the vast majority of people's thinking about what was going to happen with Eastern Europe was that, maybe one day, but not at all, not in that time scale at all. And so some people thought infinity, and some people thought, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. But it's something that all makes sense now. Like, of course it was going to, right? Of course, yeah, right. That's a good example. Editors, right? So 12 editors, I think, turned down Harry Potter, and the 13th one was just because I think somehow accidentally the granddaughter of the CEO said, I guess not CEO, but the person in charge said, "It's a fun book, so it's all right." Some complications like that. Confederacy of Dunces is a famous example, right? So have you guys read that? That's a very famous American novel, right? John Kennedy O'Toole. I mean, it's hilarious. You should read this. It's Ignatius O'Reilly. He's this large character who sells hot dogs in New Orleans. This is this whole thing. Okay, it's total madness. But it's, I don't know how old it is now, 30 or 40 years. But it won various all sorts of awards. But it was awarded posthumously because this guy couldn't get the book published. He committed suicide. His mother then, this is a tragic story, his mother then spent a lot of time going to a lot of places to get it published. One day someone publishes it and it becomes one of the great novels. Anyway, there are lots of examples like that. So, but it's, you know, I mean, here are all the things submitted, whatever it is, music, you know, books, all sorts of stuff. And there's some decent kind of quality area over here, you know, I'm sort of, you know, the books that get chosen are kind of all around the place, right? Some of them won't take off, but there are some terrible ones, right? There are, that just don't, you know, the editors can sort those out. But it's very hard. It's very hard. And there's a lot of bandwagon. You know, when the Da Vinci Code appeared, suddenly there are a million Da Vinci Code type books. Harry Potter appears, suddenly there are a million Harry Potter, because they're like, oh, that's what people want. Well, that's what they wanted in the context of what came before, so very hard.
Isn't there a whole industry of knockoff movies that
Mm-hmm.
copy like Jurassic Park and it's all derivatives of?
Yeah, it follows because I think people will want more, but you know, it's not.
And like how they should have probably stopped making Mega Shark versus whatever after like the third one.
What was that one again?
Mega Shark.
Sharknado? Were we talking about Sharknado?
I mean,
Sharknado was pretty good.
yeah, they're gonna make a second one probably.
That seems justified.
There's a like shark blizzard movie.
Okay, so we'll see how that turns out. Good. Colorado, right? Yeah. All right.
Mega Sharks, is it like a frozen shark
No,
that's
they're
like cryogenically frozen and in a mountain? Because I feel like that could work.
They are ghost sharks that can swim in snow.
Okay, it's a winner. Let's see if it's in the success box later on. Has all the good things. Yeah, right. Okay. All right. So we realize this. You know, we realize it's this more complicated thing. So now people are doing. I've been doing this for a while, but and we showed some ads about this, trying to mess with people's social connections. Right? You want to get people to communicate your product. Google gets in there with your email, and suddenly you've got ads based on your email. Of course, Facebook is doing this. Buzz Agent's been around for a while. That's where you would get a product in the mail, and then you just simply tell your friends about it without telling them you got it in the mail, right? So it was, you know, there are lots of examples, but some things like sausages, or you get a few lines to say about it, and they changed at some point to say you really should probably tell other people that you're shilling for us. So bit of a transition. Anyway, I saw that happen in real life, which was kind of funny. Like someone turns up and they've got this product, and showing my wife actually, and I'm like, really? You know, where'd you get that from? And it sort of transpired that it was from this thing, this Buzz Agent thing. I'm like, it's not so good. Facebook tried Beacon. Now that you know, they will sort of win, I suppose, get themselves out there in some way. But this was basically, you buy something and then it gets broadcast to all your friends in this very uncool kind of way. It's kind of, right? You know, whatever it is, I bought a car and then, it gets plastered on everyone's faces. And then everything that they do. What's that?
You just get all the ads on the
Yeah. So they know about this, but it's very awkward, very clumsy, and yeah.
Did they ever find out that like you were looking at something but didn't buy it? Because like I was looking
Sure.
at like tubing the other day, like silicone tubing.
They know, yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
but I didn't buy any. So do they like get that?
Yeah, you get pounded with ads right afterwards. Amazon knows you've kind of looked at something, and they'll send you a little email saying, "Why are you looking at tubing? We have some other tubing for you." What's that? If you need to, yeah. I'm sure that's very important for some people.
Don't you have a story about you lost your iPhone or something and tweeted about it?
That's true. Yeah, it was a sad day. I lost my iPhone.
But then somebody...
And then I get a little automatic thing saying, buy a free iPhone, sort of. Yeah, less than the snowshoe running. And then I found it a week later, just sitting out. Yeah, that was very unusual. Very lucky. Anyway, I tweeted that. All right, Cialdini. This is a great book on influence. Everyone should read this. So 6 modes of influence. This is the setup. It's a very interesting cross between a popular kind of book, but also one that's footnoted and very connected. So he's a social psychologist. So reciprocation, which is you do something good for someone, and then they're bound to you a little bit, right? Their brain has to try to reciprocate because this is what human. There's no. I mean, sociopaths are outside of this realm, right? This doesn't work with them, but vast majority of humans are in trouble. He gives tons of examples. So the free samples used to be Hare Krishnas would hand out a flower. They'd just give you a nice flower in airports and so on, and that would people would be sort of driven crazy, so they'd have to go and buy a book or whatever it was. And then they'd throw the flower away, and then they'd pick the flower out, and they'd do it again. Yeah, so commitment, consistency, right? So people go through a process where they've committed to something, then it's very hard to get out, right? So it's a sunk cost kind of story. Social proof, this one is actually more, this is the murder in Queens, is a long time ago, but some people argue this is not really true, but the story was that a lot of people were just simply watching and aware that this was going on and didn't do anything. And the idea of the point here is that by seeing other people not doing anything, it's much harder for you to then do something, right? You have to act outside of there's a lot of social pressure to just, you think it's okay, or in some way. I guess the upshot, if you're ever in a bad situation, you point to someone and tell them to do something for you, right? Like you don't just ask very generally, you point at someone. So it breaks the freeze that people have in their heads. Liking, so people, simply is very simple. People simply liking you and being, polite to you and so on messes with people's brains. Authority, so there's Milgram's, again, all of these experiments are contested. There's a recent paper or book saying it's not quite as strong as everyone said. But authority, of course, these are basic modes of influence. So there are 5 there, and then scarcity is an interesting one. So, the fact that you can't get it drives people crazy, right? So, and there are possibly others, but this is a taxonomy of the dominant ones. So we'll look at models where it's really social proof is the driving thing. Okay. I mean, you can see this just destroys small. Children's brains is my personal experience. Like everyone else is doing this. It's like I want it to. I mean, it is very, very deeply human behavior. Right. So these are decent heuristics. I mean, if everyone else is, for instance, the social proof. If everyone else is wearing UGG boots, then you kind of, maybe they're really comfortable, right? Like you don't have to even try them on to think to yourself that these people they've figured something out, right? Like there's something in, and you start to think there's something, you might just think, well, I just want to be like everyone else, which is fine. So that's the first part. That's just sort of a safety thing. It's like, I will go with the team. It's kind of weird, but we're all going to do that. Okay, put on the boots. Or you might think, well, I guess they are good, right? I mean, how can, a billion people be wrong? Interesting. They do that regularly. So just for the social proofing, quite useful. And it may be that you think that these other people, they have individually decided this is a good thing, whatever they're doing, right? That they're really enjoying this thing. And because they're voting for you, essentially. So you don't have to test it out, right? You simply put on the boots and you're happy.
Is there some sort of backlash against that thing?
When everyone else is doing something?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a paper on that this year. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Sure, well, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. So eventually there's hipsters, right? If everyone else is doing it, then, it's gone. So a lot of things have trouble with that. Facebook has trouble with that. Anything that's adopted broadly, it's like, now it's uncool.
Facebook isn't as cool with the younger
I mean, it can't be. Your parents are on it? I mean, that is horrible. I mean, that's really quite horrible. Why would you want to be in a space that, right. Anyway. yeah, it's like a giant mole or something. I mean, it's just not, yeah. It doesn't seem interesting to me. Anyway, so these are very useful things. These are decent heuristics. They're not bad things to have, right? They're good, right? I will now run over the cliff with everyone else because, you know, if I'm standing there, I think I might, I don't know, maybe there's a lion or something. But lemmings, apparently, that's overblown. Okay. Of course, these things can be leveraged. And so the problem when they're leveraged is then that you start to not be able to use these natural heuristics anymore, right? So if someone comes along and they do something nice for you, you're like, what are you trying to sell? You know, like, it breaks down all of, you can't use these ways of behaving anymore. Yeah, you know they're just lying, right? It's a reasonable yeah. Yeah. Other kinds of influence, this is just some extra stuff, but conspicuous consumption, right? This is right. So you demonstrate everything by your wealth by consuming. There's also the opposite of that, which is from the, because I think this is really true. So from the Northwest, right? So you'd show how wealthy you are by piling all your stuff in and burning it all, right? So like, I don't know, conspicuous destruction. I can get more. I'm good at getting stuff. All right, so let's get to some models. And yeah. Okay, so the social proof is the one we're going to look for. Right? So to build into that, so I spoke about this in our very first lectures. So Schelling's model for the tipping point, I think, is Gladwell's term. But tipping comes from the 50s. People talked about, in that case, neighborhoods tipping when it was about segregation. So I had this simulation on a checkerboard, but the key thing that we want to draw out of this is he had an idea of thresholds, right? So that a fraction of people behaving in the same way as you or not behaving the same way as you would precipitate an action, right? So if 7/10 of your friends do this, then you will also do it because you're, not a mindless automaton, but you're, well, a little bit, but you have a threshold, right? Okay. There's some you can play around with Schelling's model if you like. There's a NetLogo version. So all right, so that's 71. So Nobel Prize for this fellow later on. Granovetter has a paper in 78, which is nicely laid out. But if you've done a little bit of chaos theory, it's maps of the interval, and so I'll show you that in a second. But it takes the threshold idea and abstracts it to people watching everyone else. So this is the mass media kind of situation, right? So you, for some reason, can tell what the whole population is doing, yeah? And if 80% of them are doing this, then you might, you'll adopt something or not, right? So that's the way this is working. This was a, not a network thing, but it's a simulation on a lattice, right? So this is a more complicated. That's a hard thing to analyze, actually. So this is now a mean field model. You take away all spatial structure, you can see what everyone else is doing on average. Exciting, right? Okay, so what we would call a mean field model. There are others, there are herding models. So these are economists showing themselves that rational behavior leads to disaster, which is confusing. There's a whole body of work that comes after that called social learning. It's rational in the sense that people are doing things somewhat probabilistically, right? They're trying to infer what people's other other people's decisions were. So that's where it can go wrong. All right, so that's a whole other thing. So we want to start with this one, Granovetter. Bikhchandani, I'm going to say. The best names are Sri Lankan ones, actually. They usually have 6 or 7 names, and they're very, very long. Yeah. Okay. All right, thresholds, right? So you adopt a certain behavior or whatever it is, storming the Bastille, or yeah, that's okay. Yeah. But other people can have different thresholds, and that's how you can get some really interesting behavior here. At least in the mean field case, we'll see some really interesting things when you go from mean field to networks to different kinds of networks. That will be really, really different behavior, very kind of unexpected sorts of things. So others could be, everyone in the whole world, or in France or whatever it is. Or it could be just, you know, your close friends or the people that influence you about whatever it is, soda choices. Okay. Shoe choices. Okay, so it can be, you could imagine models that are probabilistic or deterministic, right? They're sort of flipping coins, or it's just they're switches. This is a key thing, especially in the mean field model. And you know, there are all sorts of assumptions in these simple models, but if 5 of your friends are doing something, it doesn't matter how they came to that, right? Now there's just 5. You just see 5 out of 8 or whatever it is. You just see that number. And in these very simple models, each person has the same amount of influence. You can, per tie, if you like, per tie, right? Each one has the same vote. So in a network situation, right, we could vary this, but it's kind of crazy to start varying these things too much before you get anywhere. So you have this person experiences the same, right? If these people are switched on to something, right, Ugg boots, they're wearing the Ugg boots, then the influence is 1, right? They feel 1 unit of Ugg boot coming towards them, and 0 units from this person who is wisely held out. I mean, just fashion is spectacular. I mean, you look at just the way people, you know, dress in a particular area. I mean, how they dress at UVM, how they dress, you know, people. I mean, if you're big enough places, then there's a lot more diversity. But but the people emulate each other. There are certain. I mean, some people don't care, but there's a whole.
You would never see somebody over like the age of 8 in New York wearing rain boots.
Right, but people do here, right? Tons of people do, with all sorts of things.
Totally normal.
Mm-hmm. But you could be out with the cows later on, so you know. So it's a fair thing. You will, but not perhaps in the same percentage, right?
Like everybody here wears, like I always stood out because I wore sneakers. Sneakers were waterproof.
But there is definitely someone dressed as a giraffe walking around New York right now, probably, right? I mean, you know, anything you want. There's someone with those. There'll be someone, probably from Vermont, actually. There, you know. But anyway, so.
I just have to, when I first moved to Vermont, I moved from New Jersey, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And my roommate, the first night we were going to go out, he was like, hey, $2 switchbacks at wherever. And I was like, okay, cool. Let me just change my clothes. And he looked at me and he was like, it's King Vermont. He's like, do you have pants? Shoes? Do you have a shirt?
Like how much change is because it's below.
Right. But then, so this weekend,
It's very practical
I went to
change.
my friends and family in Connecticut.
Mm.
And the second I walked in, they said, you look so granola. Oh, thank you.
It's done. You've been assimilated. Yeah.
So,
Into this place where everyone is different.
yeah.
But
No, but I don't know
no,
why
I'm
I
kidding.
didn't
Right.
get it.
Right? Yeah.
We're country granola.
I thought I would share that because it's true.
Even if you don't know it. Oh,
I
yeah.
don't think that it's happening to you. It is happening to you.
Oh, it's spectacular. Yeah. People have no idea. Yeah. And then they're shocked to realize that everyone else is wearing the same jeans or something. They're like, oh my God, you know. Or you see massive differences in tiny, right? Everyone's wearing the jeans, but they're different because this one is like this much longer than that one. They're all completely different. You know, from your resolution, which is very, very specific, these are very different clothes. And you stand back from a distance like, wow, everyone is the same. I'm like, no, we're not. All right. Okay, so this is these things are obviously very unrealistic, but that's fine. Okay, so and I talked about this earlier on. So you want to imitate just from a sort of an evolutionary story. You don't know too much about the world, which is always true. So why not, use other people's decisions and behaviors to influence you to wear rain boots. Rain boots are good things. The gum boots, we always had gum boots at home. Well, I grew up on a farm, right? So,
in New York City.
no. Put on your gummies. So economics always has terrible terms for things. So they like to say externalities, so network externalities. It's just nothing sounds good when they say it. so that two other people, you know, so Facebook, right? So other people being on Facebook, they start to influence you and say, well, you should be on Facebook, right? So the fact that more people join gives you a benefit and so on, right? Yes, terrible things. Operating systems, Linux. Yeah, right. So the fact that people are adopting it just makes the thing better, right? Okay. All right. So let's have a little break, and then we'll have. Oh, so wrong. Right.
Whatever mountain you set out to conquer every.
Wow, that's just really wrong. Sorry. Wow, volume. Skip ad. Anyway, this is just for no apparent reason. It's just something that's being shared right now. This is great. We'll watch a minute or two of this. So YouTube, of course, is fantastic for generating emulation, right? I mean, it's just great. I mean, from just figuring out how to do something.
A little bit. I mean, you hit the brakes for that corner.
This is just terrifying.
Do they say where he is?
I don't know where this is. Does anyone recognize this? It feels like Europe.
It does feel like Europe. They just showed
Like it's something you'd ride your bike up because it's got all those, right? But that, you know, video, right? I mean, YouTube, how old's YouTube? Is it 2005, 4? It's been around forever for you guys, but it's it's so young in you know the history of humans. So you can, I mean, you can watch whatever you want, right? So the ability to, and we're good at emulating things we can see, right? This is not written down with words, which is very clever. This is boom, you know.
I would be exhausted doing this for 14 minutes.
The cars? Yeah, this goes for 15 minutes. I think he has a break at some point.
You just switch. Oh my gosh.
The switch is terrible. When I first saw that, I'm like, oh, are you kidding me?
Switch to like direction.
It's like, look,
I mean, the idea is to slow yourself down a little bit there.
these cruise, they should have, yeah, this little speedometer thing happening.
It's like the last time
You
I
do
did
want a speeder.
skateboard, I like pretty sure I fell
He goes aero. He goes aero.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's yeah, he's trying to go faster.
No, he's not gonna.
Right.
Can you jump to the end front of this?
Yeah, wait,
So I
can we
was
see the
gonna
end?
ask, like you mentioned.
I was trying to have a few different parts. Yeah, he's still alive here, so I guess that's what you want to see. There is one bit where he has to have a break. This bit, let's show you this.
I feel like you would want
That's kind of cool. I mean, it's just a tunnel. Yeah, this is definitely Europe, right?
yeah. A lot of character with the soundtrack.
Wow. Okay. All right, I'll put a different one in there. That's disappointing. Anyway, mental health break there for us. Okay, so now we'll have a little model and see how far we get with this. All right, so very simple. As I said, you can have individual or stochastic response functions. And it could be, let's say people are rioting, right? So if this is a situation where if 0.6 of the people you see are on, then you switch as well, at least that much, right? And then you will switch. This is your probability of adoption. This is probabilistic. This is a situation where you have susceptible and then infected. We can still use those terms, right? So you're not rioting and then boom, you're on. So 2 states.
actually just increasing the size of a hallway would actually prevent people from rioting.
This is because they won a sports game or something like that. This is. Yeah, you're right. Right. No, you change the structures of things, and yeah. Yeah, and there's real research on that, which is interesting. Okay, so all right, let's go through how this is the Granovetter model. Here is a very simple example of how it would work. All right, so everyone has, and this is extremely simple, everyone has a simple response function, right? Right? They just have what we call a perfect threshold response function. So some threshold above which they're on. Now, so they have their own threshold. So let's imagine we have some distribution like this. It's kind of a normal distribution with some truncation centered around a half. Okay, so there are very few. So these are the gullible ones, or the ones that are easily switched on, right? And you have models where you have a bunch just sitting here at 0. They're just on. They're like, yes, straight away. They're just on. They're just walking around in Ugg boots or whatever it is. You can have a non-zero piece here. Yeah. Or give them negative thresholds or something like that. Okay, and then out here, these are the ones that are hardest to switch on, right? All right, so I guess I have the analysis on the next. No, okay, so let's do it. All right, so.
At a certain point when it gets to be so many people, then people just won't join. Like if you have a riot and then there's those people that get scared because there's a riot going on, so they hide in their cellar.
Yeah, so they have a different threshold. Their threshold is 1, right? They won't, or 1 plus epsilon.
Well,
they will not riot.
Maybe they would riot if it was like 25% of the people or like 4 people.
So that you can imagine that. So people have some kind of response function like this. Yeah. So we made a ridiculous model of this, actually. I mean, we kind of went down crazy. It was chaos on networks on. But yes, that's quite entirely reasonable. Yeah, yeah. Like I will wear boots like other people until everyone's got them. Yeah, no, it's not so cool. It's true. It's just like, no, right, throw them away, never wear them again. So you have f of phi star. This is the distribution of thresholds. So what you need to know, so imagine this just happens every time step. You look around and you see the fraction of people who are doing something. It's a very simple thing, but I just want to get it across. Okay, so you look around, and so the fraction that are on in the next time step will be, so let's say phi of t is the fraction on that are activated, right? So you can be on or off. So phi of t plus 1 is equal to the fraction of the population with thresholds, right? Their thresholds are less than or equal to phi of t, right? So they're seeing more than their threshold, right? The fraction of people that are on right now exceeds their threshold. So people with really low thresholds, people who are just right up to the, right? So if this is 0.6, everyone who has a threshold, an internal threshold of 0.6 or less, will be on in the next time step. And then we'll do it again, right? We'll take this phi of t plus 1 and we'll put it here and we'll get phi of t plus 2. So how do you count this up? What's the fraction of the population that has a threshold less than or equal to? Yeah, so there's not even a network yet of the whole population. Yeah. So a network creates all sorts of trouble. And you know this is the distribution of thresholds. Okay. Phi of t plus 1 is equal to the integral. Thresholds go from 0 to phi of t d phi of star. Right, this is the integral, right, from 0 to the current fraction that are infected of the distribution of thresholds. That will give you the fraction of people whose thresholds is less than the current one. And this is equal to this is the cumulative, right? We use big F for the cumulative. Just the normal cumulative distribution. So this mathematically gives us a very nice little thing to play with. We have some threshold distribution. We integrate it. So there are a number of steps here. We integrate it. That's the so there's a capital F here. This is the integral of this guy here. It's the cumulative distribution. And that gives us a way of stepping through, right? So we put phi of t in, find what its value is, we get phi of t plus 1, right? And then we stick it in here. So these are called iterates of the interval, maps of the interval, right? Interval being 0 to 1, meaning that, just the standard interval. So you take a number between 0 and 1, inclusive, and it gets sent to a new number between 0 and 1, and then you keep doing it, right? And then this is chaos, and dynamical systems love this kind of stuff. So let's say we start with 0.5. Well, there's actually a fixed point here, because if you go to 0.5, that maps to 0.5. Right? So if half of the population is on, that'll still be true. In the next time step, and it'll stay. And one way, and then let's imagine we're just above that, right? So it's 0.5 plus epsilon. That maps to a number that's slightly bigger than 0.5. Again, and it's slightly bigger than your initial number because this gradient, this slope is greater than 1. So what you could do is you go over here, you get your value, and you walk back over here, and you'd stick it in here. And then you'd map it up there, and you'd get your value, and you go over and stick it in here. What we do with these things, and many of you will have seen these, I guess, but they're cobweb diagrams, right? So a nice way to, instead of, let's imagine you're here, right? So you've mapped to this point. We could go over here and find our new value, put it here, and then map to the next point. But a nice way to do it, instead of going this way, we just go to the y equals x line, because that is what you will do, right? We're going to, this point here, this is our new value of, that's how many are infected now. Okay, we could swing that around here, and we'll go to here. We're trying to move from this point to this point, the same value, right? If it's 0.78, we want to start at 0.78. But those guys hit on this square here, so we might as well just go joink, joink, joink. So this is the way you can do these maps. They're quite nice. They're little cobweb diagrams. This will go up, this will iterate and iterate and iterate. And you can see what's going to happen here. You go across to the y equals x line, you plot to the, move to the function, cross the y equals x line, move to the function, so on. So this is a unstable fixed point in the middle, because if you're just adjacent to it, it moves away. These are stable fixed points. If you've got no one riding, you stay with 0. Everyone's wearing Ugg boots, you stay in that horrific situation. But if you start above 0.5, so there's an event that happens beforehand, right? You're handing the Ugg boots out, whatever it is, that gets some fraction of the population involved, and then the social engine cranks from there. And you get this iteration. It's a very simplistic model. It involves people looking at everyone else at the same time and making the next step, right? There's a big clock. So it's like you come out in the morning and you see the Ugg boots and you're like, okay. And the next day you come out with or without Ugg boots on based on your previous experience.
And it doesn't allow for spontaneous creation of these systems because it has to be seeded with it.
Has to be seeded, yeah, that's right, has to be seeded. So it will, if this, you can imagine if this, so you're right. If there's some fraction that's just going to do it already, right? When you create your cumulative distribution, you'll have a function that's got to end up at 1, but it could start above 0. And if that's true, if you start at 0, then it's going to map like this. So that's a really, that's an excellent addition here. We can come to it later on, but if you've got a cumulative, a function f, right, it has to increase. This is say, this is phi of t plus 1. This is phi of t. In this situation, if you start here, then it's going to map like this. There's your fixed point. If you start above it, it will actually come down to this guy. So there's some stable point. So there's some grumpy characters who don't want to adopt it no matter what. There are some, you know, they're all over it, these characters, and it will always start. So you can build in, yeah, just within the model itself, you can make that happen. Yeah. Right, so this is a critical mass model. You have to start with a critical mass. You have to use some other mechanism to get at least half the population on board, and then it takes off from there. right? So a lot of things have a critical mass nature to them. We'll see a very beautiful version of that with networks.
So is this tested in reality? Like, is this how the world works, or is this just theory?
No, so this is just theory. So this is this 1978 model by Granovetter, and we're going to move it out to different kind of theoretical things. These are examples where we have a solid, where the theory is clear and simple, and we have analytic results, and we understand exactly how they play out. So we can start to, you know, when you go to reality, you have an anchor point, right? And it can inspire you to do the wrong things because, you know, you need to move out through your models as much as you can until you know, you can't really understand them anymore in a very natural kind of way. Well, the really key thing is, you know, this is something that people are still trying to measure if it's measurable at all. What are people's behavioral responses like to seeing, you know, some dose they're getting? I mean, it's a brutal term to use, but there's some dose they're getting about a particular thing, and they're getting doses about many other things. Some of them are fighting with each other, right? And so,
to what degree is the advertising for efficiency Vermont affecting people's willingness to invest in energy efficiency? And the threshold of,
yeah.
oh yeah, I'll do that now.
Yeah. I mean, it's very common. I mean, so this is a very reasonable kind of abstract model to use for social contagion to start with, but it's not everything. So, yeah, and of course people go wrong. They start to think, okay, everyone looks like this, but it's not true. This is a model that's a critical mass as well. Right? You integrate this guy, you get this very thin thing. So this is a nice example because it doesn't look, right? What you have here is, well, there's a bunch of reasonable people. They're kind of in the middle, right? There aren't too many completely grumpy ones, and there are sort of a bunch of early adopters here. But this distribution is pretty, it's near a kind of edge. It doesn't look like it there, but when you do the integral, it is actually, because if you move this a little bit this way, so all right, so what's happening? Here's a starting condition. It goes bounce, 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 goes to 0. Right? This one takes off this way. So again, it's critical mass. Anything that starts above, in this case 0.4, goes to 1. So what happens if we moved, if we just kind of introduced some, we started to, whatever it was, people changed their preferences a little bit. The threshold started to drop, and this distribution moved a little bit this way. The weight of it moved a little bit this way. So when you integrated it, you got this curve moves above the y equals x line. So what happens then? Yeah, so suddenly this stable point becomes an unstable point. That is a huge, so this is a thinking at least that's very important, right? Now we have these kinds of, you know, and maybe it's a very abstract model, but it can also help you to kind of at least begin to understand some massive transitions in society, like the fall of Eastern Europe, where, you know, it didn't seem like anything particular happened, but, you know, everyone's moving and shifting in their preferences in just a little bit, and now you suddenly cross a boundary. This doesn't look like anything crossed over here, but now you have a way for a very small seed to take off. And that's when things can just go, you know, explode, for good or bad. But that's at least this at least, you know, unlocks a narrative for systems. For this particular, you know, a particular narrative for a course that a social system could take that wasn't really available. Same with the Schelling model, right? We had to just run this. We had to, you know, mess around. We obviously made a lot of other models that no one ever talks about because they didn't work. Okay. This is one where you have a bunch of gullible characters here, and the grumpy ones, there are not so many in the middle. So they're all going to jump on board, but it's going to run into a wall here. And so you see that when you do the integral of this guy, it has more of a shape here. So this is above 1. Any initial seed is going to take off. If absolutely no one is doing this, then it can't take off, right? But you just need a small fraction. But there is a fixed point here. It gets in there pretty quickly. It's a little exponential thing. But if it's above, then for some reason you paid everyone to do it to start with, and you know, like you give everyone Ugg boots, then there's going to be a bunch of people who are just not going to wear them the next day, right? Right, but all these people have their stories. They're very comfy. They look good, which is incorrect, right? But correct. Which is true in Australia. So this is where they're from, right? So that's absolutely true, and you would never wear them outside. Anyway. It's the outside-inside thing. Yeah. This is insanity, but it asks you, it gets to some of it. If this is the response, this is the cumulative, and it's not a cumulative anymore. Now this is how the system behaves, right? So this is just a map for the fraction they're on to the now at time t to the next time t plus 1. This is a tent map. It's a famous little map to play around with. You can see bad things happen when you iterate a lot. So it's chaotic, and in fact, any point, if you start at any point, then it'll basically travel all over the place. So anyway, that's now you've moved a little too far away from your original model, but we happily did that because it became a very interesting dynamical systems model. All right. Okay, so a couple of nice papers there. Okay, but so in terms of getting a story out, right? So we had this with Schelling already, but I'll say it again. So the simplest narrative, you might say, right, if everyone's got Ugg boots on, then they all like Ugg boots, maybe, right? And so that's collective uniformity of implying that individuals they all agree in a sort of a separate way. But if there's copying and emulating, which there always is, then this doesn't work. So you can see it's giving you different processes, different reasons for why things come about. And then this is a big eye-opening point. And in fact, Timur Koran, who has that book and a paper, which if you want, you can read that paper. It's associated with the fall of Eastern Europe, invokes exactly this, in a simple way, the Granovetter type model, because it does give you insight into. It gives you. I mean, it's not exactly, of course it doesn't say this is how things happen, but it gives you an opening, a mental hold, if you like, on a particular kind of mechanism for how a society could unravel. Or you get such a dramatic change, right? Nothing looked terribly different from yesterday to today, but suddenly it can take off. You see how systems can be at edges. It just happens in dynamical system things all the time, right? There are bifurcation points, critical points, blah, blah, blah. You can be right next to them and not really quite know. Okay, all right, so I'm going to talk about the network version on Thursday, but it's going to be this paper that published in 2002, has about 1,000 citations, and we'll explore all these other papers. But it's quite a beautiful body of work that took about, I guess not too long, but I suppose 5 or 6 years it took to solve this model properly. It took a while to get this thing published, but the big transition will be, I've shown you this little mean field model, that gives us some insight into things, put it on a network, very different behavior. Of course, things live on networks, plus mean field. So very fun model, interesting model. So more insights come from this thing. All right? All right. Okay. You can run away.